So our keynote today is Anton Chuvakin, Head of Solution Strategy at Google. My guess is if you've been doing security for any length of time at all, you have definitely already run into something from Anton. He's been putting out all sorts of outstanding research and kind of thought pieces and blogs and white papers and everything throughout years and years and years. And so, of course, when the paper that came out that this talk is based on, I read it and was really, really excited about what was in it. It was one of those things where you read it and you're just like, yes, right? I just felt like the Mandalorian at the moment. It's like, yes, this is the way, right? This is the direction we need to be going with blue teams. And so when I saw that, I was like, you know what? This would make an outstanding keynote for a ton of blue teamers to hear, because it really sets direction, I think, for where we need to go as an industry and what's going to keep us successful moving forward in a world where data just continues to pile on and pile on. So we invited him to share the stage with us here and share this awesome research and paper and all the information behind it with us. So with that, I will hand it over to you, Anton. Thank you.
Perfect. Hello there. Let me just confirm that everything is working, because I'm kind of pursuing a plan B technology-wise. I'm presenting from a phone. Unfortunately, it did not work on a PC. So let's see.
Yep, you're all good.
Oh, okay. So you guys actually see me and the slides. That is amazing. Of course, I see my slides on the phone only, so it's going to be a little small for me, but I know what's on them. So it's going to be fun. Let's do it. I named this talk How to 10x the SOC, because it's kind of a tradition, I guess, at the place where I work, to sort of look for 10x solutions. By the way, let me just see. Can you guys see me flip the slides or not? I guess, because I'm not sharing.
Looks like it doesn't flip, but we can flip them for you.
Okay, perfect. Let me just confirm that I can see the slides then. Second. Yeah. So sorry. Yes, I'll also be saying next slide then. Perfect. That's good. So 10x, the whole thinking about 10x is kind of a tradition at Google, because people here sometimes try to look for ways to dramatically change something. So I wanted to see how some of this thinking applies to a SOC. Again, this is a keynote, so I wouldn't probably give you like configuration settings and stuff, but I'll try to see what can we do to make sure our SOCs, our security operations centers, work for the future, for the near future, and possibly for the medium-term future, given all the changes. Next slide, please. And maybe straight to the next. This to me is kind of one of the ways to define SOC. I don't want to spend time defining SOC on a SOC summit, but I want to highlight one element that would be quite important throughout the whole presentation. To me, when I think of a SOC, I think of course, a fusion of team, process, and technology. But ultimately, when somebody wakes me up at 3 a.m. and hey, here in California, this is 6 a.m., so it's almost the same, I think first of a team. So when you tell me, Anton, our SOC, blah blah blah, whatever, I first think of a group of people. Now, just yesterday, I spoke to somebody who first think of SOC as a physical space. And I'm sorry for this guy, but SOC isn't a physical room with a bunch of expensive chairs. Well, so a SOC may have a bunch of expensive chairs in a room, but to me, SOC is primarily a team. So this colors a lot of my thinking about SOC. It's not about where's the door to my SOC, and what kind of screens do I have, and do I have 2 screens per analyst, and how many analysts, and all that stuff. I think of a team first, like the group of people. They may be virtual, they may be working on these things, watching the screens, not watching the screens. So to me, the center of a SOC identity is a team. Of course, they follow a process, they pursue threats, they use technology, and we will highlight a lot of that today during our discussion about the whole 10x angle. But this is important to me because I wanted to kind of address some of the skeptics. Of course, yesterday I had a bit of a fun debate about the future of a SOC, and some of the arguments about SOC is dead because there's this COVID thing and we can't sit in big rooms anymore. To me, this is silly, because of course a SOC is a team, and that still means that there's a mission for SOC, and the mission would continue. Next slide, please. But why can't we just do kind of roughly what we do in SOCs? I mean, to me, I've encountered my first SOC physical space. Yes, it was a room in 2002 when I visited a SOC for a particular bank that shall remain nameless, but it's a big bank. And I thought, this is my first-hand exposure to a SOC. And again, they did have expensive chairs in the room, but ultimately, why can't we just continue following the sort of 2002, maybe you call it late 90s model of SOC, and just like improve things? Next slide. To me, there are many forces affecting SOC, and this comes from some work we've done. We've done with Deloitte to kind of like cataloging some things. There are many ways to outline what is changing, why it's changing. And to me, what's critical is not necessarily one lens, but the fact that most of the people who discuss, how security operations is changing, why it's changing, what should we do, sort of circle around the same themes. Some of them hit the theme of too many attacks. I don't like the too many attacks theme, because too many attacks theme is like, if you ask a typical SOC manager from, 2002, he would tell you, oh, there are too many attacks. So it isn't something that, in my mind, have changed, at least in the perception of people who sit in SOCs. It's not like the people in the SOC in 2002 would say, no, we don't have enough attacks, we're good. Like, no, that's not how it worked. So I like to talk about the expanding attack surface. We have just too much stuff to protect. So to me, sometimes I highlight the fact that if you had mainframes and servers, Linux servers, Unix servers 20 years ago, guess what you have today? Actually, that too, and all the new stuff, all the containers, microservices, clouds, new devices. So to me, the whole expanding attack surface is very much a fact. We can debate, are there more threats? Sure, there are more threats, but to me, the fact that we have more stuff to protect is more important, and there's more different stuff to protect. There are too many alerts. We fortunately pay more attention to detection nowadays. So there is more. There are more signals. There are more signals from more things. In many years ago, we didn't have things like EDR. We didn't have CASB. We didn't have other cloud stuff. So to me, this is central. And of course, talent shortage. I don't want to dwell on this. Everybody's ears are probably ringing from everybody talking about it. But the point is not so much that we don't have enough people. We may have enough people. We just don't have enough, people with the right skills. I mean, I've met somebody who wants to hire, top tier threat hunters in some numbers, and it's like, well, there aren't enough out there. So let's stop dwelling on this. I'm just going to give a quick example from recent history about the changes. Next slide, please. So this is from my recent blog, and again, I really did title it that. So some people poked fun on me on Twitter, well, some cruel fun as well. But this is just like a one quick glimpse, dropping from a high-level discussion about changes to like specific situation of a SOC that is given an expanded mandate to monitor certain things in cloud computing, and then they have to deal with things that they just haven't lived for long enough, and for some reason. And again, you can see the details in the blog, but the idea is that, like, context I'm always drawn when I think of this slide. I don't think about like, hey, I need a new parser for logs. I think about the very alien for an on-premise security professional detection context. You don't have server names, and you don't have MAC addresses and what floor the server is located and who owns this. A lot of this is sitting in a lot of very strange, for an on-premise security engineer, constructs, and there's like distinguished name and project name and resource and this and that. And also it differs across the cloud providers. Here in GCP, we have this stuff, and elsewhere we have that stuff. So to me, this is where some of the things become really strange and different. And this is just like one very quick glimpse of how things dramatically change in many areas. So let's go to the next slide and like quickly dwell about what are the improvement routes? What can we do? And of course, you always encounter, like I always encounter people who talk about how they want to dramatically change something. But when you start talking operational details, you realize they kind of want to improve things by 10%. So let's go to the next slide. And here, this is my, I've given a presentation on modern SOC for a year or for a couple of years. And this slide was kind of highlighting the traditional SOC. And so I kind of hijacked my own slide to kind of try to say, okay, so this is like a normal SOC. If you enter a SOC in 2002, when people are sitting around those early SIM products, and they have like little screens and they click alerts, and I wouldn't name products because some of them from whoever was in the SOC at the time. And it was very much clear. It was very clear if you go into an early SOC that it was inspired by the help desk or by knock, where there are like things appearing and you have to troubleshoot things. So if you try to look at things like alert pipeline, and there's this like bunch of alerts coming through a screen, and you may have some kind of an ancient tool, and in the net tool you have this alert blink on the screen. This like normal kind of a classic SOC views, but imagine that you improve them. You say, I can handle more alerts. I can handle 10% more alerts, and maybe I would improve at 10% a year. Maybe I have threat intelligence, and I spend 10% less time getting threat intelligence into detections. Maybe I have 10% faster confirmation of alerts. To me, pushing these buttons and pushing all these buttons repeatedly, you would just not give the result we want. You would not deal with the change in attack surface. You would not deal with change in threats. You would not deal with change in business. I didn't dwell on that, but it's pretty obvious that the way people do business, digital business, transformation, all this fancy stuff that, you know, as I sometimes joke, our bosses talk about. But the thing is, to me, it is very clear that there's no linear, gradual improvement path. And if you follow that path, because you can follow that path, the result would be that you would kind of crash. And you would crash by burning out. You would crash by realizing that business changes, not exponentially. Of course, it changes linearly. It's just like a curve that goes much sharper than our curve. Business goes faster like this, and SOC goes faster like that. So to me, the whole magic of 10x, and kind of like one of the interesting, slightly philosophical concepts, is that when your threat landscape, when your number of assets, when your number of alerts changes by a factor of 2, you really cannot expect that the SOC would grow by a factor of 2. This is kind of a juicy and fairly obvious bit. So if you linearly improve your SOC and business grows, or IT grows, or threats grow, SOC has to grow linearly with that. And admittedly, this is not doable. It's just not flat out not doable for anybody, even for people with fairly sizable buckets of money, like, well, big banks, or, well, Google. The idea here is that we have to do things differently. So the 10x improvement is the essence, the philosophy of 10x improvement is that we do want the SOC to grow in capability as business grows rapidly, but we have to grow without that type of linear, gradual improvement, because if you pursue this path, it's going to crash. So this is another slide I'm kind of hijacking from the previous presentations, where I kind of described some of the tenets of a modern SOC. Today, I don't want to dwell on that. Some of you may have seen it, others may have seen the presentations. I'm going to spend maybe 2-3 minutes kind of running through some of the things and doing 3 highlights. Today, I wanted to dedicate most of my time to a journey to that, to a journey to some kind of model that can scale with the changes in landscape, business, IT, and all the other stuff. So I'll go through some of the items here, but to me, the critical part is I just want to latch them or nail them to the board, so then I can draw the path for some of you, for many of you, to that place. So levels are kind of breaking up, level 1, level 2, level 3. We are sort of sitting in the organizing SOC by skill. I mean, I've written some papers on this. There's some materials that you can find online about how to work with a SOC that's organized by this, and there's a detailed slide afterwards. The structures, the processes you have in a SOC, triage, other stuff, confirmation, would structure around threats, not around individual alerts. You may have too many alerts, but you probably have fewer threats, and that's why you have people who've been tracking campaigns, people who've been tracking actors, tend to see alerts as just manifestations of that, and so they have fewer things to track. It's kind of a bit philosophical, but I'll get to operational stuff a bit later. Of course, in that SOC, you have hunting, or maybe there's adjacent team, because that means you would catch attackers where your detection tech would go give you a false negative, or you wouldn't detect it in change at all. So hunting is definitely present in that type of upgraded or improved or modern SOC. Or there are many visibility approaches. Of course, it's not just logs, it's EDR, it's traffic analysis, it's maybe in-app telemetry in the near future. There's a lot more automation. Now, you may not like the term SOAR that my former colleagues at Gartner have created, but let's just not talk about SOAR specifically. Let's talk about the fact that there's a much increased amount of automation in many elements of the SOC, not just triage. It may be the detection deployments, the testing that I cover next, and other things. So admittedly, there's more automation of different types, and I will highlight some of this. There's a deeper analysis of coverage. Of course, we all know and love Attack Matrix and other stuff from MITRE. But the magic here is not just in the fact that there's a way to tag detections and tag things that we observe with new, MITRE identifiers. The idea is that we can be a lot more persistent about what we are detecting, so we can have deeper coverage and we can have deeper awareness about what we are actually covering in our detections. TI is consumed, produced, shared. Of course, I know that the sharing of intel is kind of very much a rat hole, and some people will get upset at me if I start pushing this button too much. But the idea is that the intelligence role is quite a bit more central in the SOC that I would build in 2021 compared to, say, 2002. And I'm leaving the last bit for later, namely that your detection logic is not just created by some faceless drones in the basement or by a vendor. You often have a much closer collaboration between people who kind of click alerts, if there are people who click alerts, and people who actually create logic that drives alerts. Detection engineering, you'll see some highlights on that later on. But to me, this is one of the bigger pieces that you would see play out in this transformation journey. So organization of a team, processes, new processes like hunting, old processes organized differently, more visibility approaches, more automation, deeper view of coverage and testing, deeper testing of what we detect, bigger role for threat intel, and detection engineering that kind of fuses the response to alerts with creation of alerts are kind of some of the tenets of what I would consider to be a modern SOC that can work under that stress. Before I go into the journey slides, I wanted to very quickly run through 3 critical pieces from that. So this picture, I kind of stole it from our paper with Deloitte, where we kind of outlined how to make this whole non-tier-based model work. So given that my topic today is slightly different, I wanted to hit one element of that. So imagine that the person, so that to me, that was the most helpful when I first encountered a SOC that's built not on a tiered model. Or what was most helpful to me is to see that the person who looks at the volume of alerts, the person who is kind of the level 1 in the sense that he looks at a bunch of stuff and then he escalates. In that other SOC, the person who looks at the alerts first or signals first was not really a level 1. He was just an early alert triage specialist. And he may have senior or junior. The point is that his superpower was in identifying things that matter in the big pile of noise. So his job wasn't to escalate. His job was to actually identify what's important. And this is a subtle change to a mission. It's not about this matters, I'm going to respond, this I don't know, I'm going to escalate. This one doesn't matter, like a supposedly proverbial level 1 job from a classic SOC. But this person was meant to help the company defend against the threats, against threat type thinking, not alert type thinking. And his superpower was to identify things. By the way, sorry, I forgot to say flip slides. And so my bad, I got kind of a little bit too excited. So apologies for that. Flip to the next slide afterwards. Yeah. Yeah, see, that means I can probably present it without slides. Next slide again. Yeah. So yeah, I'll be more diligent in the future. Apologies. This was just too much fun. So the person who looks at the alerts first was not a level 1. He was a person whose superpower is to identify alerts in the noise. And other people were sort of experts in applying methodologies and tools and automation to confirm the alerts. So to me, this is what drove the type of a skill-based SOC in one model. And yeah, there are a lot of details about how to actually make it work. But the point is that it can be made work, and it works in a way that kind of clears some of the challenges with this whole solid tiered model that came to us from a NOC or from a help desk. Next slide, please. So here, this is a paper, a picture from a paper we wrote actually with SANS together on detection engineering. But the reasons I'm highlighting this is not just that there is this way to write detections as code, or you should really throw out your UI and start coding detections. It's not the point. The point is that when you approach detection as kind of as a more programmatic approach, more comprehensive, more systematic approach, you realize that you need to test more, you need to automate the deployments, you need to automate feedback, and you need to kind of automate dealing with signals. So it's almost like, again, you'd see this, I'm gonna sort of, I guess, reveal some of the surprises from later on. It's almost like if you develop something and you're a developer and there's some other person who runs it. In a SOC, this type of a developer, I'm a developer, I write detections, you're an operations person, you sit in a SOC and watch the screens. If it's separate, then you're really not practicing that way. But if it's becoming to be fused, kind of like dev and ops fused in DevOps in IT, you sort of get a result of a person who can develop detections, who knows what to detect, who does threat research, but who also is at least somewhat responsible for how these detections fare in the real world. What kind of alerts are produced? Are there things being missed? So to me, it's not about we need to code and we need to throw out the UI. To me, this is about we need to test, we need to reuse code, we need to understand modularity of detections, we need to approach them in a more cross-vendor, cross-tool approach, but we also need to own the code we wrote, not just here's code, throw it over the fence. In that sense, when I talk to people, when I talk to our people in the Google team in this area, the Google probably pushed it all the way to 11, where people who are responsible for alert handling are people who wrote the code that produced alerts and who are the same people who did the threat research that led to a detection. To me, there's a lot of nuance and frankly, in some cases, a lot of cost to making it work well, but you don't have to push it to 11. You can push it to some other number, not 11, where you have a lot tighter work between people who write detections and people who actually kind of quote unquote detect. So we'll touch on this a bit more because this is kind of one of the juicy kind of secrets, I guess, of that. Next slide, please. And this is the classic that, again, I've shoved in people's faces for a good number of years in different forms. The reason I'm highlighting this is that I still see too many SOCs that are kind of SIEM-centric. And again, I love SIEM. I've encountered my first SIEM in some winter day around mid-January 2002. It was in New Jersey. Yeah, I guess it may explain what SIEM it was. But the point is, my encounter with that SIEM led to a long love affair with SIEM. And so I'm happy to promote SIEM to everybody or its related technologies. But I am well aware of the fact that we can't just live on logs, on the diet of logs alone. And of course, those of you who are fans of Richard Bately and NSM and or NDR as it's presented here know that network monitoring is critical and was always critical in light SOCs. And now we have a lot more endpoint monitoring because we have EDR, we have all this other tech. And we probably are close to the era of increased use of application telemetry, all this like cool observability stuff that IT people are talking about, but security people aren't yet. To me, the focus here is that SIEM and or log analysis in some shape or form would remain critical, but it would remain one of the elements of visibility. It would not just be logs, it would be EDR, NDR logs, in-app telemetry. If you have a log, if you have a SOC that just sits around the SIEM and kind of like hopes for the best, you may be a little bit behind. So let's get to the next slide and kind of try to actually build the bridges from mostly traditional SOC, maybe with some things being improved, to this type of a modern 10x improved SOC that can withstand the pressures from threats, from changes to business, changes to IT, and other things. So I am not, by the way, dissing, criticizing, and kind of like throwing gradual improvement in the trash. I'm not saying that. I'm kind of aware of the fact, and this is like, I'm going to wax poetic a little bit for 2 minutes, literally, that for many organizations, especially with the more traditional security teams, they do want to gradually improve because they want to keep things that's safe, that are working. But it's interesting how sometimes I would encounter a CISO who would talk about dramatic improvements. We need to transform. We need to catch up. Business is transforming. All these things change well. But then if you go to 2 levels down, or maybe however levels down, people sort of want to keep most of the stuff they have. And this is how we end up with people who are deploying traditional tools in the cloud and hope for the best. So we do want to keep what we have, work with that, but still kind of jet or boost ourselves to this type of 10x future. This is tricky, and this is not something that I expect that for the next couple of years, a lot of my time would be dedicated to helping people go there, not necessarily with our tools, but with tools and practices that enable that type of a SOC model. So next slide, please. So this is not just kind of a high-ish level view of this type of how to transform a SOC from a particular current state that's sort of like, let's call it traditional plus improvements, traditional plus, or maybe like if you are a fan of numeric maturity diagrams, you may be kind of in a 2.8 or a 3. And please don't ask me about the methodology in this case. I'm just like made up a number because I want to say that this is not a SOC that would be a 5, means that everything works well, and if things change radically, it would still work well. So it's a good enough SOC or almost good SOC to a stage where you can actually work with all sorts of modern threats, modern IT elements, modern business decisions, modern stakeholders, and like a DevOps team is kind of a stakeholder. If your IT changed and the security didn't, yeah, you may be in trouble. Now, one thing that would show up in the themes, and there are a couple of other specific bridges. This is kind of like this is your kind of a map of a bridge, and I'll show you specific bridges in a few minutes, in a couple of minutes, where we kind of talk about the themes we highlighted. We grow the analysts to develop detections, and ultimately we end up in analysts and engineers who become the same people, kind of what we have and what some other companies have. And again, if you read some of the stuff written by Netflix about SOC-less detection and some of the Palantir stuff and some of the others, you see signs of teams that operate that way, where you don't have, oh, you're just alert clicker and I'm the smart guy who writes detections. No, these are the same people. You may still be improving triage process, but at some point, your triage process will have more automated elements. There would be more code. There would be more playbooks that run. And then some of the time freed would either go to scale or to build those detections, and or to start hunting and doing more threat research, threat intelligence creation. And again, I'm not pushing everybody to this transformational stage, but I'm kind of highlighting the fact that you will need to be more in tune with what happens in the threat landscape so you can detect things before your vendor gives you a signature on a little silver platter. And on the visibility side, on the technology, we would have the sort of a gradual journey from, here's my SIEM, I'm going to clutch my SIEM appliance in my hands and I'm going to like grab it like this and like, this is my SIEM, I'm not going to give it to anybody, to sort of a more maybe something more cloud friendly. You probably saw a blog post where I said, if you're buying a SIEM today, it better be a SaaS SIEM, otherwise in a few years you'd be sad. But there also be EDR. There would be other things that observe cloud, that give you telemetry from other type of modern elements of IT. And then you automate, and you have either SOAR or homegrown stack of similar type, or you script. But the point is that you start dedicating more of your time to developing automations and less time to clicking alerts. And again, see this how it starts to come together. I'm a SOC analyst. Oh, wait a second, and I write detections. I realize a lot of my detections are really not that great, and they annoy me because I am now the person who looks at them, and I think, I'm going to make them better. And then I realize some detections cannot be made better. I just need to automate the triage. And then I think, I can actually do this part, and then alert response to these alerts would be automated by a SOAR. Okay, so my time is freed. I can write better detections, or I can write better code that produces detections. And suddenly the light bulb starts to go on, and I'm realizing that my SOC can grow capability faster without growing the tool budgets, without growing the people budgets at the speed that I need to. So I'm going to now go to the sort of like the actual juicy bits, and I'm going to give you these things. So people who are kind of high-level thinkers, they want to see this type of frameworky stuff, but people who want to go and act want to see more details. So let's do this. Next slide, please. So I'm going to go talk about this example framework for people, and then I'm going to give you action items on people's side, and then we'll do the same for tech and for process. So the theme we're pursuing here is that we are trying to grow analysts to be more than, well, people who analyze signals that come to them. We may hire partners. So again, I'm not talking about much outsourcing or MDR, but As I've said in my Gartner days, every SOC is a hybrid SOC today. You have some kind of third-party partner that you would leverage for some activities. But you are also offering a way to, well, not just be an analyst, but be a person who kind of develops the SOC actively. This is the kind of like how to go from where you are today to some kind of a Google-like or enlightened, or I shouldn't say Google-like, but because we may be too special for this. But at the other end, you end up with people who literally write detections, pursue detections, do threat research, and I guess I hate to use another buzzword from the stolen from IT, but it's kind of like I guess it's a full stack detection engineer would be the term. Okay, I cringe when I say that. So, but it's the person who kind of develops and maintains and runs code and who's kind of on the hook for actually detecting threat actors. And again, not just one person like that, but the entire SOC becomes like that. And then this ends up being a way to kind of spread and federate. To me, this is one other theme in the people transformation that I've encountered to make the SOC grow, is that you sort of have the centralized security operations center, but you also have security operations excellence in different areas. So to me, this is again another thing that we are stealing from the land of SREs and DevOps and IT transformational elements, where people sort of have embedded skills. So I almost feel, and in the paper we do say that when I think of SOC, circa 2025, the C, the center in the SOC, it's not going to stand for center meaning a central location. C in the SOC would stand for center of excellence. It wouldn't necessarily be a centrally located SOC. Again, the some people who run federated alert response, where they route alerts to people who actually know what's going on. This is maybe one of the elements of that model. Okay, so you don't like, if you are the person who needs to see things to do. Next slide, please. So this is to make this useful. I'm going to kind of descend very rapidly. I'm going to get just like do a dive bomber move, and jump to things that you sort of can do. Again, organizing your SOC. So they're not like click here to make your SOC go 10x, but things that you can do in a more immediate time frame rather than stare at frameworks that Anton made up. So if you remember one step, it's the first. Remove walls in the SOC that separates analysts who respond to alerts and engineers who write detections. Remove walls sounds kind of philosophical, and again, in an extreme, they're just the same people. There are no walls. It's just like one person, the same team, the same people. But in a more gradual way, it's conversations, rotations, joint exercises, many more things you can do, so that as a result, you develop a way to build detections that don't poison people's minds, that don't waste their time. 3 is kind of another one that I would highlight, namely that you would end up with focusing some of the time, and eventually larger amounts of time, on building automations that handle things rather than on handling things. If you've seen my latest blog post, and again, I'm not here to sell the blog, it kind of highlights the whole toil concept from the SRE land, from the sort of a Google approach to sort of what others may call DevOps, about how this type of non-productive work can be eliminated with automation. So this is probably another one that I would make central in my SOC development. Given I'm watching the clock and we have maybe about 15 minutes, I wanted to spend more time on the other transformational elements. So next slide, please. So process sounds kind of dry. And to me, process, however, is exciting, because I'm as a sort of a technologist, I'm still not completely comfortable with people. We may laugh at that, but it's true. And I also fully realize that the fact that you bought an expensive tool, but you have 1/10 of the manpower you needed to use it, this is where process is kind of what saves you. It's process optimization may end up being one way to break the link between growing assets, growing business, growing threats, and your SOC growth, because ultimately that's what we are doing. We are kind of breaking the link between SOC capability growth and just like linear scale of business IT threat growth. So from alert triage, ultimately you are doing the 10% improvements. If I have too many alerts, you're figuring out which alerts you can close automatically, what sort of context you need. But ultimately you start building the basics of like, okay, I'm going to modify detection. So on the tactical side, you're sort of doing the 10% improvements, but you're starting to think about like, okay, I'm going to have my eye on the prize, and the prize is that there's a lot of automation. My hunts feed detections. I start to hunt. I probably don't hunt. I don't have a hunting process at the initial stage. I start hunting. Hunting feeds detections. Detections feeds better detections. Better detections feeds fewer alerts. Alerts are more actionable. Alerts can be closed automatically by machines. Alert triage is becoming more automated. And of course, it would never be fully automated. Of course, you'd encounter top tier threat actors, well, hopefully not, where humans have to go hand-to-hand combat with them. But then ultimately you start realizing that you can build detections, and you can build detections that produce signals. And that path, again, decouples or breaks from the threat growth, attack growth, other growth that you can't control. So if I have a few people, a core team of people who write detections, who respond to alerts, alerts are clean, I have hunts to account for what would be a false negative in my detections. I create intel, I feed intel into detections, and I adopt this kind of automated workflows for a lot of things. I test automatically, I check for coverage, I focus on gaps in coverage, I threat research, I drop it into detections, I get alerts. Like, to me, this becomes a really well-oiled machine on the process side. And I've seen an amazingly effective machines where people process machines, not systems. Well, systems actually, entire systems, where the amount of data they handle is staggering. And again, I'm not here to reveal more of Google's secrets, but some of the stuff that I've encountered in terms of productivity of that type of SOC is kind of unbelievable. And by unbelievable, I mean, I didn't believe it. I just had to talk to people a few times before they said, yeah, really, that is actually going on. So, okay, wow. So next slide, please. And this is the crisp and kind of effective steps. My favorites. Probably, well, one is not super actionable. It's kind of like, don't act. Don't go for cool, sexy things that maybe a random vendor tells you about before you actually get the alert triage to be better. I've seen examples, and I'm gonna cry. I have this blog post from a couple of years ago, which is about clown grade SOC, where people can barely collect logs, but they're trying to hunt. This does not end well. It does not end well in terms of performance. It does not end well in terms of cost. It does not end well, period. So you would have to head-on hit triage before you go hunting. And you want to hit triage and detection tuning way before you go hunt. Three is another favorite, where site reliability engineering as a philosophy, again, pioneered at Google, ends up with essentially, I'm not going to go between SRE and DevOps, but the idea is that you allocate your operations / engineering types time to developing automations, to developing, well, code in their case, but developing automations, whether it's playbooks, automated pipelines for detection, or other stuff. And ultimately, as I said in this whole kill toil, do eng in a SOC blog post, you sort of start pushing more time towards this and less time towards clicking alerts, escalating, refining. Because ultimately, everything, no, not everything, almost everything your classic security analyst does would be kind of done by some machine guided by a human. And that human would be that type of a analyst plus engineer who is building detections, building playbooks, and then dealing with stuff that needs to be dealt with manually. There will be manual stuff, no debate. Now, some of the stuff is, again, kind of more on the transparency, kind of a philosophical item. To me, again, I'm going to very quickly wax poetic here on the process side. We're writing another paper with Deloitte and on this exact topic. And one of the painful elements that I have to deal with, I've been procrastinating about my section of the paper because I still haven't finished my thinking process, is about the following. Process implies some kind of formal, rigid process. You say process, a lot of people see like little Visio boxes, little arrows, like box, box, box. And they think that process implies that you are kind of dehumanizing people and you're like making them click buttons instead of think and all that. But you say process and you see that, that means you imagine a rigid process. And I may imagine a very creative process. I may imagine a hunter, a threat hunter, not like, deer hunter, who is out to stalk a threat actor using the best he has. He's going to give it his best shot, her best shot, frankly. Actually, I've seen more of that lately, fortunately. And she's going to give it her best shot. And the idea is that it is about creative process. It's not about like rigid process. So how do you make SOC work where you have to have consistent, repeatable process and creativity? So this secret we're going to crack in this new paper. So I don't really know the answer yet, but I know that this is kind of what happens in these type of transformed 10x SOCs, where you are consistent, you have good coverage, you have predictable process, and you're creative, and it somehow works together. Okay, next slide, please. Tech. Now, do you need a shopping list of stuff to buy? No, I'm not going to give it to you. I know a lot of acronyms, though. And being a former Gartner analyst, I've lived in acronyms. And of course, some of you know that I've made a mistake of when I was trying to coin acronym for the endpoint technology that later became EDR, I added a fourth letter, ETDR, right? And then the Gartner people told me, no, we don't do full acronyms anymore. And suddenly 5 years passed by, and guess what they coined? A 5-letter acronym. So the point is that there's a lot of tech to buy. You can buy CNAP. This is a new thing they built for cloud native application protection platforms. So it's like nice 5 letters. So if they have to NG it, it would be like a NG CNAP, a next generation cloud native application protection platform. So 7 letters. Okay, so let's see in 3 years. So I digress. The point is there's a lot of tech you can buy, but what kind of tech you should buy and what kind of tech you have that you can use in your SOC on your transformation journey. The theme of not just improving your SIEM or tossing your SIEM, buying a better SIEM is really not going to get you there. What would get you there is likely a triad with visibility, experiments with SOAR at a more early stage, and then ultimately I would prefer visibility tools for new environments like cloud. Of course, it may talk about working with cloud providers or with cloud provider tools to observe cloud. But to me, where we would end up on the tool side is probably not going to be as transformational as on the process. But to me, transforming tools is kind of not your job unless you're writing tools and if you build in this data science stacks, as some of the SOCs do, but few. Likely you'd be following either the open source development route or the commercial vendor route or doing some of your own development. If you have very limited kind of customization development resources in your SOC, I would probably throw them all into building detections for whatever tool of choice. It may be SIEM, maybe EDR, maybe traffic site, and the rest of the resources I would throw at some form of SOAR or automation platform for playbooks and activities, because this is how I pursue triage, and this is how I pursue detections. So if you have limited resources, that's where I would send them. But ultimately, I'm not going to obsess about AI and ML. I'm not going to obsess about ML unicorns coming to save you. And I feel I would focus more about the predictable and robust detection pipelines, high alert quality. And if I can have things that help with that, I'll use them. Next slide, please. On the other hand, my, again, first action is kind of a non-action item. Don't discard your SIEM UBA or don't discard your log analysis. Like, I mean, it's not about SIEM so much. It's kind of about don't throw away your log analysis. Don't throw away your modern or next gen or SIEM 3.0 or whatever. Like, just keep it because you would need some form of log analysis for the foreseeable future, no matter what happens. We may need more of it. As things go more cloud native, you would end up with likely more log analysis, not less. The point about tools is that if you are kind of a cloud haters or cloud skeptics, you should probably be aware that the software as a service tools will win in the end. Look at how EDRs moved to SaaS. They're all cloud backended now, kind of like CrowdStrike and the others who were there first. Same happens with SIEM, same would happen with other tools. Ultimately, the cloud backends and the improved analytics of these tools would win. So if you're not transforming your tool set to use more SaaS, it's a mistake. You will have to. Not immediately, but you'd have to eventually, because otherwise things just wouldn't work. SOAR or automation layer or like automated workflows, automated playbooks. Again, I'm not here to sell SOAR tech specifically, but I am here to imply that unless you automate post-detection activities, you're going to be in trouble and you would not get to that 10x capabilities. Now, very quickly, I'm going to go to the next slide and like flash it for a second, and I'm going to like not talk about it. This is stolen from one of the SOC transformation advice guidance that I've built for somebody. And the reason I'm pointing an arrow at prevent, which we did not talk about at all, is that one other kind of a hidden element of SOC of the future or 10x SOC is that you will need to influence. And I don't mean to run influence operations. Actually, hey, I do. And you need to run influence operations on people who actually own prevention and some of IT. So there's also an element of this type of converged, improved 10x SOC that would imply that things around the SOC would have to be built in a way to support that operation. It's almost like if you have IT that's already different, that's like a DevOpsy, modern, agile IT, you probably already steal from them. They influence you to build better SOC rather than the opposite. But as time progresses, you would have to influence who builds the hygiene controls, basic controls, who builds encryption, who builds other things. A lot of noise elimination would happen there. It wouldn't happen in your better SIM filters or better EDR filters. Again, I don't want to pick an example from Google. Of course, the two-factor auth, well-made two-factor auth, two-factor authentication cleans out a lot of noise, a lot of phishing noise, a lot of other noise. So when you do, and again, I'm going to say zero trust, and then some of you may hate me for it. So when we follow a zero trust style framework, kind of like what we do with Beyond Corp, and you harden some things, a lot of stuff that goes into SOC just doesn't show up in the SOC because it never happens. So to me, this type of influence part is a sizable chunk of your mission as a designer of the 10x SOC of the future. This is probably another presentation for next year. Let's go to recommendations, which is the next slide. And I have about 1 minute. That's good. So SOC lives on. That to me, that matters. And SOC is not dead. SOC won't be dead because SOC ultimately is a team, and there would always be a team. They won't be robots. They would be robots, but they won't be robots only. That part is very clear to me. Modernize your SOC, but preserve the mission. Ultimately, we're 10xing the SOC down the path of detection and response mission. We're not trying to, steer it to do other stuff like, I don't know, compliance. Automation, it's kind of a beaten theme, but to me, I want to highlight the next one that I sort of highlighted today in a few times. But when you kind of, I use DevOps as a word, when you DevOps your detection engineering, when you fuse development of detections with alert response, that idea, I've seen it really deliver that type of 10x potential. Here at Google, probably delivered more like 100x potential, but that's a separate story. Learn new detection context for cloud and cloud native tools, because ultimately a lot of your tools, a lot of our tools in the SOC would be cloud backended, and a lot of what we monitor, where we detect threats would be cloud as well. So that part is kind of a big part of the SOC, big SOC of the future. And then on the tool side, I probably want people to discard more tools, not because I have more tools to sell them, but because a lot of tools end up defining your process in a way that can't go with you to the next future. So I had a debate with somebody who runs an EDR, and his EDR does not have APIs, and he's trying to automate. And how do you automate without APIs? I don't know. You can't. So hopefully it was fun. Again, I probably didn't give you enough of the things to click on, but hopefully I changed your thinking in some regards. Let's go to the next slide. That's a resources slide. It's probably more useful to like click buttons and see things. Some of the stuff is highlighted. More details on this is in the second link, new paper. But a lot of things are kind of in my head, and a lot of other thinking of people around me, which deal with SOCs that sort of crossed that barrier, that sort of transformed. And how do we use lessons we learned from them to help others? Thank you very much for your attention today. I'm going to jump into Slack now because obviously I wasn't watching Slack while talking.
All right. Thank you very much. Fantastic work here. So yeah, I love the analysis that you had on here, the traditional and the mapping to the modern SOC. And of course, closing it up with SOC won't always be dead, or will never be dead, right? It's always going to be there as a team, but going to be changed into a SOC, center of excellence, which I was saying in the chat room, we're probably going to need some acronym engineering to figure out what we're going to call it going into the future. But some of the stuff I wanted to emphasize for those listening here, you may have not heard of SRE before. A few people were asking about that in the chat room. We dropped links to some of the Google literature that's posted out there on that. There's a full kind of open book that you can read for free, and there's a bunch of chapters in there that really, really set the stage for this mode of thinking. And it's definitely one thing that when I first read it a while back, it was like a giant light bulb moment for me. And I was like, even though it's about Google site reliability engineering, I'm looking at it and I'm like, there's a lot in here security can pick up. And then this paper came out and I was like, there's the link we needed, right? To explain how this can be applied to security, which I think is why it was perfect for this sort of thing. So I would encourage everyone to, of course, download and check out the slides here, but read the paper as well. There's a whole bunch of other depth and stuff that goes into that, the SRE book that goes with it. I think it's definitely kind of the way forward for security and what we're going to need to be successful into the future. So thank you very much, Anton, for joining us, especially at 6 a.m. your time. We appreciate it a lot. Always a pleasure. And thank you.
Perfect. Thank you.